All right. So, everyone, with that David Copperfieldish introduction, please welcome to Peter White Public Library celebrated art historian and my friend Ellen Longsworth. And I'm going to mute myself, Ellen, and you can take over.
Thank you, Marty, very much. There we go. Winslow Homer was born in Boston in 1836, and at age 19, he was apprenticed to a very important lithographic concern in Boston. So he began his life as an illustrator. Lithography is one of several printmaking media that I won't go into. He didn't use lithography for very long. He left Boston in 1859 for New York. He had been working for Harper's Weekly, and he went to New York in order to further his professional interests with Harper's Weekly and other magazines. As one art historian put it, he was like a modern photojournalist. He freelanced, and this is an example of one of his typical, not lithographs as you can see, but wood engraving. I will explain that just briefly because it's a remarkable art. The artist sketches on a prepared block of wood that's been treated with a white substance, maybe gesso, maybe paint. And then the engraver has to remove all of the wood around all of the black lines to produce the kind of print that you see here. I just find that technically really quite astounding. What I want you to notice about this work, however, is the fact that it's packed with figures. Lots of activity, lots going on. This, as you will see, changes dramatically as Homer develops his own vision. He, let's see, when he was in New York, he attended the National Academy of Design. We don't really know what his training as an artist consisted of, other than the apprenticeship as a lithographer. While he was working for Harper's, as the Civil War began, he was sent to the front to Virginia to record what he saw there, both battles and the life in the camps. And what interested him most was precisely the latter. And here you see a night scene with the soldiers entertaining themselves. However, one of the most famous images from this period is this magnificent wood engraving, as you can see now, from 62. And its title, I'm sorry, you can't see it because of the icons, is Army of the Potomac sharpshooter. Homer was not at all interested in that that portion of the war, let's say. He considered this process of sitting in a tree and aiming a rifle at someone just nothing short of murder. And I quote him more or less by saying that, but it's an exquisite print. And I think you can see here much better than you could in the slightly earlier engraving, how detailed it is. And here we have where he's going as an artist. That is, it's a single figure. There is an enormous amount of energy here expressed. If you can see his face, the expression on his face, for instance, the way in which he's seated, balancing himself in the tree. I mean, the tenseness of this figure is, this composition is absolutely remarkable. He produced paintings, then he started painting in the 1860s at some point, early 1860s. And this is one of those many paintings that he created of camp life in Virginia, characterizing these soldiers, each one differently and very sympathetically. His most famous painting, as you probably know, from this era, from his Civil War adventures, I guess you could say, is this Prisoners from the Front. It's in every survey text. And once again, he's characterizing the figures, in very individual ways. They're not portraits, but the Confederate soldier here, I think you'd call him kind of obstinate. This old man, beaten down. This fellow looks a little, shall we say, simple. And then there's the commanding officer here. The body language that he has employed here in expressing what clearly he must have seen, and I'll get back to that in a moment, is quite remarkable. This wood engraving leads me in another direction. This is, it says Dad's Coming. As you can see, it's a work from after the war, when he begins making paintings and engravings of everyday subjects, families, mostly, however, children, both boys and girls, and kind of taking advantage of the attitude which emerged after the war of people wanting to have fun again. And this particular image really isn't that. What it tells us or gives us an impression of is something else that is ongoing in Homer's art. And that is, we don't really know what he means by this image. Dad's coming. The young man is looking out to sea. His mother clearly has no interest. Why? We don't know. And is Dad coming? Or is this just a hope on the part of the little boy? Now, such a wood engraving as this and others that he made derive from paintings that he created. As you can see, this is oil on wood, not on canvas. And then approximately a decade later, in the 1870s, he begins working in watercolor. And I'm going to spend quite a time with his watercolors because they are exquisite. But I'm showing you this one here. I don't have a precise date for it because now the focus is on this little boy. There's no mother, and he's still hopeful that Dad's coming. But is he? The ambiguity of this image is one of the first such images I'll be showing you where the meaning really isn't clear, and Homer's just not going to tell us. This is berry picking, another example of the subjects that he began to focus on after the war. Children engaged in useful activities like this, but also children at play, and I'll get to those in a few moments. Now, this is 74. I am taking you back a few years now. In 1866, Homer took himself abroad to Paris, and he was there for 10 months. We do not know what he saw. You know, art historians would give their eye teeth to know what he saw. But at the same time, he's there. Monet is embarking upon his career as an artist. This is, and we call it an early impressionist painting. It's not very impressionistic, but nevertheless, that's what we call it. But I want you to notice the very firm organization of these triangles and the large fields of color, all of which happen to be white or a pale beige here. And this is how he has organized this composition largely, with the tree in the near center. Now, in the same year, Homer, back home again in New York, paints a series of works like this, which all have to do with playing croquet. Croquet had been introduced just fairly recently then from Britain into the United States, and people of means like these people, you can imagine, just went crazy for the sport. I loved playing it when I was a kid. Anyway, look at these triangles, these solid areas of color. And I have a quote from Henry James, who otherwise was very critical of Homer. He didn't care much for Homer, but he did say this about him in terms of what you see here. The quote comes from 1875. He sees not in lines, but in masses, in gross, broad masses. Things come already modeled to his eye. And this gets me to the point that I think I made in passing earlier, and that is that Homer painted what he saw. Now, those of you in the audience I know who are artists yourselves or study art, you know that if something is painted precisely from life, it's not necessarily going to be a work of art. There's manipulation that goes on. But nevertheless, he would say, and he didn't speak much about his art or write much about his art at all, but he would say over and over again that he painted from life without exaggeration. And his landscapes, and we'll see some seascapes coming up, in these he paid full attention to the effects of weather, light, time of day, and so forth. I personally think this is an exquisite painting, but in any event, we need to move on. Also in that vein is the Bridal Path, White Mountains. Here, I think you can see whatever effect early Impressionism had on Homer, it's clearly in evidence here. It's just a brilliant, brilliant painting, both in terms of its conception, but also in terms of the light. And then perhaps another famous painting that you might be familiar with, it's the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Long Beach, New Jersey. And here you see light pervading the whole, and getting back to his sense of composition and three-dimensionality. Here we have one of his few paintings that I'm aware of, in which you have figures which take us into deep, deep space. Now, we have no idea if he knew the ins and outs of one-point linear perspective or not, but we see these figures taking us back into space, and then the light-filled sky just illuminates the whole. He was fond of painting svelte women. He never married. He may have had affairs. We have no idea. But I thought this was a particularly charming image. We see this woman blowing a dinner horn, and blowing the horn at seaside. The sea is right here. Early on in Homer's work, the sea kind of climbs into the composition. It seems to be almost always present. And here, wind is also something that he was very much aware of. And look at the way her skirt is being blown, and the light on her back. You can almost sense her figure underneath this light material. It's just absolutely exquisite. And this vision of his, this vision of female loveliness, is going to change, as we'll see. So this is the early Hopper. This is an extraordinary painting, unlike anything else that I'm aware he painted. And you can imagine him standing here at the beach, oil and canvas and or cardboard in hand here, as the caption tells you, and painting these children playing the waves. He's using what some of you recognize as what we call a painterly mode of application of the paint, in that you have broad strokes of paint here. They suggest the form, they don't detail the form. This form is detailed, okay? This is what we art historians call linear, a linear treatment of form. This is a painterly, suggestive treatment of form. He painted nothing like this ever again, but it's a perfect example of his emphasis on painting en plein air, as the French would say, outside, which was unusual. The Barbizon school in France, I think, initiated this method of painting, but in the United States, artists just did not. They painted in their studios. And let me see if I'm going to share, how am I doing here? Share another quote with you about this from one writer whose name is Sheldon, to whom Homer actually spoke. He was one of very few. And Sheldon wrote in 1880, almost everything that he has shown to the public has been drawn directly from nature. No painter in this country probably has a profounder respect for such outdoor work, a more lively apprehension of its value, or a sincerer and more serious aversion to manufactured and conventional studio pictures. Which brings me to my next point or points. He found, as one of my sources put it, the Adirondacks in 1870. And he painted this exquisite work, which I'm sorry is not, maybe if I move my screen, it shows up a little bit better, but it absolutely glows with light. And it's called an Adirondack Lake, I think you can see, which embodies what we will continue to see to a greater and greater degree, Harper's love of wild nature and man, and also occasionally woman, as we'll see, as part of that environment. Now, the next painting takes us 7 years hence, but it in effect is a culmination of what I just showed you before. This single figure in this wilderness setting, seemingly quite at home, but these two guides, and it's the only portrait we have. The fellow in the red shirt is Monroe Holt, and the bearded fellow who's pointing out into the distance is Orson Old Mountain Phelps. I mean, what a great name. And they've been chopping wood, maybe clearing a path for hikers or for hunters. And there's a perfect relationship between these figures, not just that they are positioned in the near center of the composition, but the reds, the golds, the greens, the grays of their shirts and trousers, and what we see echoed here in the foreground in all of this beautifully painted wildflower meadow, not to mention, again, the sky and the light. Now, having said that, in contrast, we here in America have, as part of our history, the development of a very important school of landscape painting headed by Thomas Cole. He's credited with the organization of the so-called Hudson River School. He didn't know anything about it, but anyway, his landscapes spoke to a lot of people, artists and others. And this is one of his more famous landscapes, which takes us to Western Massachusetts. We are on top of Mount Holyoke and looking out over an oxbow formed as part of the Connecticut River. In any event, to be brief here, Thomas Cole and others, for instance, his single pupil, Frederick Church, considered landscape not just a subject to be treated in and of itself. That's Homer. But as symbolic of the presence of God. There's a famous quote by Cole, which calls the beautiful wilderness that he knew in the eastern United States, for instance, an Eden here on earth. And what is remarkable about this painting, there's a lot, but truly remarkable, is right back here on the mountain, part of the Holyoke Range, are letters which spell the Hebrew word Shaddai, S-H-A-D-I-E, I believe, A-A-A-I, I'm sorry, Shaddai. And it wasn't known, it wasn't recognized for decades after this painting was shown in New York and then acquired by the Met. And what it means is, Shaddai means is the Almighty. And what's even more remarkable is that the letters are facing heaven. They're not drawn, so to speak, with our view in mind at all, but God's. And again, this is another painting I'm especially drawn to, Twilight in the Wilderness. Some say Church created this very dramatic image as the Civil War broke out, as a way of symbolizing the drama and the bloodshed that was to follow. Don't know about that for sure, but in any event, it's a landscape that was not painted for itself, but for romantic symbolic purposes. And there's not a person in this landscape anywhere. I thought you'd enjoy this plate of charming images of Homer's, of children, boys primarily in these images. Here, two boys are enjoying the visage of this little girl who sits huddled. She looks like she's probably pretty pleased about the attention she's receiving. But this is how he also treated landscape, so to speak. He shall I say, personalizes it and brings it to an ordinary individual's own experience. These little boys, this girl in these fields. Nobody painted like this, nobody at all. You probably know this work, Snap the Whip. This was a work that he was inspired to paint when he was visiting in the Hudson River Valley and visiting a school. And I guess the kids were out playing and he captured that energy, that delight in being alive. By the way, he did not paint portraits, but for the wilderness guides, as far as I know, none of these are portraits. They're individualized through posture, gesture, a slightly different physiognomy, but they are figures of his imagination based upon undoubtedly figures that he had seen. There's a second Snap the Whip, which I was unaware of until I started doing the work for this presentation. And he gets rid of the mountains. He gets rid of this figure. He gets rid of all the little figures back here. And also it's a better slide. So it has a greater presence than the other. But here is an example of what we saw in Dad's Coming, that watercolor version. He's simplifying, has a great idea for a composition, and then he thinks about it some more and says, I want to focus more on, let's say, these children gambling in the foreground. And notice he also, for whatever reason, includes a church steeple, which is not in the first version. So if you notice that, maybe he means to bring some kind of sacred meaning to this this playful activity. We don't know. Husband John, loves this painting, Breezing Up. And I asked him the other day, well, why? He said, because it's so realistic. The boat here is it healing? It's healing, his healing. And the kids here, these two boys are, he told me they are hiking out so that they balance the boat so that it won't go all the way into the water. This is called a combing rail, which is there in order to try to prevent water from getting into the cockpit here. But so anyway, three boys, and as it was described in the literature, a father of maybe one of them or all of them, I don't know. And what is also quite memorable about this work, and John mentioned this as well, is the light here on the sail. And the activity of the waves. It is something that he saw, that Homer saw, and he's not idealizing it. He's bringing it home to whomever wishes to see and pay attention to this. One of his first real sea pieces, I would say. Now, in the 1870s, he began painting in watercolor, and at about the same time that he adopted that medium in 1875, he stopped his work as an illustrator. We don't know why, maybe he got tired of it, but for a good 20 years, he had led a kind of a double life as a painter and as an illustrator. So this is one of his early watercolors, and I want you to notice this is gouache. If you're not familiar, it's a heavy, dense watercolor. I love it because it will, it will create planes of color like this without much effort, like a thick impasto of oil. In any event, this is a sick chicken. Here is this lovely young lady who is lovingly taking care of this sick chicken. I can't imagine any other artist who would pay attention to the farm life here, and that would include, as here, a sick chicken. In any event, I think it's just exquisite. In terms of his handling of watercolor, this is something that's important to note. It's very tight. Okay. It's linear. I used that term a while back when we were looking at the skirts of the woman from the back. Very linear, tight, beautiful, but tight. Okay. Just a couple of years later, in Fresh Air, he creates this image of a girl, and he's using watercolor in a very different way. To use the same term as I used when I was talking about that beach scene, it's a painterly application of watercolor. So not only are let's say, the color more freely painted on the wove paper, but there's a translucence that, if any of you have ever painted in watercolor, you know is a very natural characteristic of the medium, but it's not that easy to work with. But Homer shows himself to be an absolute master of this medium, which is very difficult. Another example called Apple Picking from about the same time, late 70s, and he's using gouache here to emphasize the sparkling sunlight that comes through the leaves. Very suggestive forms here, the faces, the bodies of these children. It's not until he's in his late 40s, early 50s that his art truly matures, and he's on the way in these particular works. Now, in 1881, apparently because he wanted to see works by Turner, the English artist Turner, he went to London And when he was finished there, he spent about 2 years here, not exactly here because it looked a lot different than it does now. But this is on the North Sea, Cullercoats Bay, as you can read here, Tynemouth, England. This changed his image. That is what and how he saw the world. This is a photograph of the town when he was there. As I said, he arrived there in about 1801, maybe 1802 after London. A fishing village, which subsequently became something of an artist colony, but it wasn't that when he was there. He was impressed by the fishermen and the fisherwomen who worked very, very hard. And at this point in his career as an artist, he begins to see the sea as not just a comrade, but a perilous entity in nature. You don't see this here. You'll see examples of that coming up shortly. This is a watercolor. He primarily painted in watercolors here. Probably it was just easier to transport them across the ocean. And I'm sorry the resolution here isn't very good, but I wanted you to see this particular image of these fisher women, or fisher girls as they were called, wives and daughters of the fishermen who worked very, very hard to make sure that their family had a decent living, and if the men apparently didn't have to do all the work, the women truly, as I understand it, took care of a lot of the effort that would go into living by and from the sea in this way. Now, why I wanted you to see this image in particular is because of the title, A Voice from the Cliffs. What's going on? We don't know. Is it a warning voice? The girls look a little concerned, but it's another of Homer's paintings in which he does not tell us what's going on. It's enigmatic. You could use the word ambiguous, and I think it's absolutely stunning. This is another work from Tynemouth, and this is charcoal and chalk on paper. I included this because of the monumentality of these figures. It was one of the best images that I could find online to give you an idea. These now are Homer's women, not the little frail girls, the beautiful young ladies. These are his women. And more than a decade after he returned to America, he painted this work, and I'll get back to where we are more specifically. But this is a work that he could very well have painted in Tynemouth, but no, this is painted in Maine, and these are the same women. And then this next one, I absolutely adore, because you think, oh, well, that's got to come from Tynemouth. He hired this woman to pose for him on the shore here, on the Maine seashore, to create this monumental painting. I don't even know how to describe it, her attitude, but she's absolutely exquisite in her defiance, maybe, monumentality, sense of herself, extraordinary. In any event, when Homer returned from Tynemouth, he did not go back to New York City. He moved out, never to return, and he moved to Prouts Neck, an extension of the Maine coast. Above it, a number of miles, is Portland, an extension of the Maine coast, and that's where he remained for the rest of his life. And he will die in his studio there on September 29th, 1910. So we're approaching that sad anniversary many, many years later. In the 1880s, when he's back here in the States, he will concentrate on the kind of painting that you see here, the trials, the tribulations of man against the sea. The perils are many, and he makes that quite clear. And I need to go a little more quickly here because I'm running out of time. So let me go to this, the fog warning, very famous painting of his from this same period. And I want to take the time to read something to you. First of all, what we have here is a sailor who has been successful in snagging a couple of halibut. His ship is there in the distance, and what is coming toward him is a fog bank, which seems to echo, even mock his profile here and here. Oh, you can't see my finger, here and here. And this is what an 1876 history of the fisheries of Gloucester has to say about something like this. It's really very, well, more than dramatic. An account related in this history of the fisheries of Gloucester tells of the insidious horrors to which fishermen were prey and could well have served as a description of the fog warning. Quote, his frail boat rides like a shell upon the surface of the sea. A moment of carelessness or inattention or a slight miscalculation may cost him his life. And a greater foe than carelessness lies in wait for its prey. The stealthy fog enwraps him in its folds, blinds his vision, cuts off all marks to guide his course, and leaves him afloat in a measureless void. And apparently this happened all too often. I found many of Homer's paintings do have narratives to them. I haven't had time to speak about very many of them, even the paintings of the children. You could, in fact, yourself make up stories, but there are stories that Homer consciously brought to his own work. Eight Bells, this is a little bit different, but another point. Eight Bells began, as you can see here on the left, as a viable painting. And then here in the late 1880s, he embarks upon the use of yet another medium, etching. So it's another printmaking medium. And that's what we see here. And the image of these men who are figuring out where they are in this stormy sea at noon, it's been determined, it's noon where they are, have been simplified. And the storminess of the sky has been increased. What an etching is, very quickly, is a soft metal plate, lead, zinc, copper, which is coated with wax, which has been melted for the purpose. And then the artist takes a stylus, let's say a pin, and draws into the wax. And then the wax and the plate is placed in a mordant, that is an acid bath, to eat into the plate through the lines that the artist has drawn, which allow the acid to bite, as we say, bite into the plate. Wax removed, inked, and you have your print, as many as the plate can manage. This work, another famous work of Hopper's, was based upon something he witnessed. In 1883, the Jersey Shore, he watched two men drag from the surf these bodies of these women. You know, they're weighed down by their bathing costumes, not the skimpy things that are worn today. And this is another of his paintings, which is an enigma. This fellow is gesturing as if there's something really not going right here. Does he know something we don't know? that these women already have perished? We don't know. It's one of his most dramatic paintings when it comes to the relationship of man and the sea, man and woman and the sea. Another work is this, called Saved. Because of the title, we know that this woman has been saved. It's based upon an earlier painting of his, and it's touted as one of his most dramatic and telling images. Now, before I leave you, I'm going to have to go pretty quickly here. The Adirondacks provided Homer with a good deal of inspiration, especially for watercolors. And he created some of his masterpieces here in the late 1880s and 90s in the medium of watercolor, such as this, and such as this, The Deer Drinking, which is one of my favorites. And I want to pause here, give me a couple more minutes. I want you to appreciate, now watercolor is so difficult. The softness of the body of this deer, you can almost visually feel its hide. And then in contrast, the watery reflection of its form as it drinks from this pool. It is part of nature. It's not just an image in nature, but part of nature. And the same must be said about the Adirondack Guide, owned by the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston. This is a figure not in nature, but of nature. And his watercolor technique is without peer. He spent time in the Caribbean, sent there initially on a commission to create some images to promote Nassau Bay, for instance, as a place of for vacationing. And mostly he spends time with the inhabitants, as here in these two images. Only occasionally, interestingly enough, you wouldn't think this, does he seize upon an opportunity to create, as you see here, the image of a hurricane. And then perhaps one of his most astounding images of nature is this, the coming storm. Here we're in Bermuda. This famous work is another of his enigmas called The Gulf Stream from 1899. We see him here in his studio, putting some finishing touches on the work, probably. A woman asked him about this work because she was very concerned about the black sailor, and he said, "Oh, he'll be okay. He's going to get rescued." And what's interesting is over here is a water spout. You don't want to get caught in a water spout. But over here is a ship. So maybe he will be rescued. Again, it's an image which is ambiguous. And Homer's just not going to tell us. Now, finally, this is a West Wind, which is a beautiful painting at the Addison Gallery in Andover, in this part of the world. You'll have to come back to this if you want to watch the video again. Also, this is a well-known painting. And then this is the shoreline of Prout's Neck, okay? This is a photograph, as you can read. And this is how Homer treated his home base for at least, not quite 20 years, about 20 years. The water, the rocks, it's all there. The water, the rocks. And this, he declared that he painted this work, and then I'll let you go here almost, 15 minutes after sunset, not 1 minute before, as up to that minute, the clouds over the sun would have their edges lighted by a brilliant glow of color. But now in this picture, he says, the sun has got beyond their immediate range and they are in shadow. The light is from the sky in this picture. You can see that it took many days of careful observation to get this, with a high sea and tide just right. So in his own words, he's telling us that he is working from nature, and without exaggerating her many moods and colors. This I can't tell you about. I'm sorry, I don't have time. I want you to see these two last paintings. The Fox Hunt takes us back into the early 90s, as you can see. This fox is being chased by crows, hungry crows, and he's probably going to lose. This is something that Homer experienced, would have seen. And it is an innovative composition, unlike anything I've ever seen as an art historian anywhere, as is this painting, created a year before his death. Right and left. There's a man here with a shotgun, and the title comes from a visitor to the exhibit of this painting. Which barrel, right or left? Right and left. Which golden eye duck has been shot? This one? Or is he diving into the waves to save himself? Or has this duck been shot and is seemingly suspended in air for a moment before he drops into the waves? And our point of view, by the way, is also the ducks, right in line with the shotgun. An extraordinary composition. This man had an enormous amount to offer to the world of art and art history, and is considered one of the finest American artists ever to have lived. The final work just kind of takes us back to the ocean with the presence of this little man who is really insignificant in terms of what else you see here. So sorry I went over a little bit, but thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. That was exactly what I expected. Brilliant. I loved listening to you talk about art. Does anybody have any, we have a few minutes here. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Ellen? You can unmute yourself, or you can put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. But does anybody have any comments or questions for Ellen at all? And like I said, you can just unmute yourself and ask if you want.
So I'm going to get off easy.
I think you are. You have quite a group here too, so.
All right, I'll be the one to say something.
Hey, Peter.
Okay.
Your brother. Sorry, I missed the first half. I will admit, I came in late. I was fixing dinner. It's interesting you brought up this last one, because I've looked at that, and I didn't, for the longest time, when I first saw the picture, the painting, I didn't realize that there was a person with a shotgun in the background. That's how good he is. It's like he's very subtle in his depiction of the thing. But you picked a great painting to show that.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot from Marty's commission here.
I got a question from Amy. It looks like it's, why do you think so little is known about his personal / love life?
Well, what I read, Aim, was that although there are letters extant that he wrote, they're mostly business correspondences, and it's have friends, but apparently he didn't talk about such things. He wasn't, I don't get the impression that he was enigmatic, but that he just kept his personal life to himself. That's all I can tell you.
Okay. That's really interesting. Leanna says, great presentation. Thank you. From George, just a fabulous presentation. Thank you for sharing. And then Nancy has a question. Nancy says, Ellen, are his oils larger than his watercolors in scale?
Yes. Let me go back to, since I have oh wait, that ways back to the West Wind. This painting measures almost 3 by 4 feet. That's pretty big, I would say. And the paintings, let's see, the Adirondack guide that I've seen, it's probably maybe 1 by 2. So I guess the simple answer is yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And can I just say, Marty, this is another painting. It just deserves so much attention. Here's this woman who is experiencing something that we aren't allowed to experience, the wind that's coming up off the ocean and blowing the meadow here. And as one of my sources said, even his signature here in the left hand corner looks like it's blown by the wind. It's unlike any of his other works, all browns. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. I'm just looking at the chat here so that people have been adding. Amy said that she sees Andrew Wyeth in the West Wind here.
Oh yeah.
And Nancy has another, though he painted from life, he did take his paintings back into his studio and took artistic license. How long do you think he took on his paintings, his oil paintings?
Well, I imagine it would depend upon the painting. The Gulf Stream, I would think, is that this way? No. Would have taken a much longer time than the West Wind, for instance, because it's much more detailed. But he was adamant about the fact that for the most part he painted out of doors. But you have to take that as a grain of salt in terms of all of his works. His watercolors were, though, from all accounts, painted outside for the most part. Well, as you know, Nan, it's a faster, well, it can be a way of applying paint in a speedier manner to get the effects that you want.
Another question from Nan. Do you know if he was also an environmentalist since he painted nature so much?
I have no idea. In one of my sources, he's called a woodsman who is also an artist. He would go hunting, so I'm not sure that this means he was an environmentalist. He'd go hunting with his brother Charles in the Adirondacks and also up in Quebec on a fairly regular basis, it seems, in his later years. So I don't know how you want to think about that.
All right. Does anybody have any final questions or comments? All right. Well, you know what, Ellen? I really want to thank you for this, all the work that you did for this presentation. And just so that you know, Ellen is going to be back. Her next presentation is going to be on Harper. And then after that, she's going to be doing Andrew Wyeth. So in a couple more months, we're going to be getting a presentation like this on Edward Hopper. And then a few months past that, we're going to get Andrew Wyeth. So, you haven't seen the last of Ellen. And by the way, Andrew Wyeth, I'm hoping is not going to be the end of Ellen either. We're going to keep on extending this and have her do some more because this is something that I just really enjoyed. But as you can tell, she did a lot of work. Oh, ask her to do Tatiani. That's what Amy just said.
Titian.
Oh, Titian. I'm sorry, I cannot read. Oh my God.
Oh, Titian.
Yes.
Okay, he'll be on the docket.
Oh, good. Okay, there you go.
I mean, if I'm on the docket, he'll be on the docket. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sorry, I could not read it. It's the white on black, and it's the screen that I couldn't read the Titian. I know who Titian is. So anyway, all right. Well, I really want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Again, there's some really wonderful programs coming up in connection with the Big Read, and it's just been a really wonderful presentation. Thomas just said a wonderful presentation. So there you go.
Thank you all. Well,
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you all
much.
very
Thanks,
much.
Ellen. You did great.
Oh,
Woohoo!
thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank
Great
you
job,
so
Ellen.
much.
You're welcome. My
Bye.
pleasure.
Great job, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Your preparation paid off.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I was hoping. Okay.
All right. Well, there we go. Oh, someone just entered the waiting room. Uh-oh. Thomas just
Oh,
entered. Thomas.
Tom. Oh, for crying out loud.
Oh, well, you're gonna have to say something to Tom if you know him.
Oh, he's a great friend of John's.
Oh, and he just left. It
Oh,
looks like. Okay, well, there you go. Well, anyway, yeah, thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording because nobody needs to listen to this. There we go.